What makes the state of North Carolina so special? Known as the Tar Heel State, North Carolina is one of the original 13 colonies, and became the 12th state to enter the Union on the 21st of November 1789. As North Carolina is one of the older states of the Union, this southern state has such a fascinating history. And, in this video, we will examine several interesting facts, stories, and truths about the state of North Carolina, some that you may already know, or not know. But before we begin, if you like this video, please click the like button as that helps the YouTube algorithm, and please subscribe to our channel, so you will be one of the first people to see more videos, just like this one. Long before the first white Europeans settled in North Carolina, Native Americans lived on the land for over 10,000 years. The earliest evidence of human existence in North Carolina was found at the Hardaway site, near Baden Lake, North Carolina. The site is located on a rocky ridge that has 4 layers, with each layer containing extensive evidence of human inhabitation, and this includes stone-lined huts and tools that were used for hunting and agriculture. The mounds were also used for ceremonial and religious purposes. The area became the homeland of the Cherokee people. The Cherokee migrated to the area several hundred years ago, coming from the Great Lakes region. For a long time, the Cherokee people called North Carolina home. Other tribes that lived in the area were the Chowanoke, the Roanoke, the Cherokee, Waxhaw, Saponi, the Cape Fear tribe, and the Catawba of Piedmont. The first Spanish explorers came to the area in the late 16th century. In 1567, Captain Juan Pardo led an expedition to claim the area as a Spanish colony, and to establish another route that could reach the silver mines in Mexico. His expedition built Fort San Juan, which is now in Burke County, North Carolina. But in 1568, natives from Jora and the surrounding region surrounded the fort, destroying it and killing all but one of the soldiers. 13 years after the destruction of the Spanish fort, in 1584, Queen Elizabeth of England granted a charter to Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh was required by the Queen to establish a colony by 1591, or lose his rights to colonization. Raleigh quickly arranged an exploration of his claim. He sent 2 ships. As they got to the area, they sighted land at what is now Cape Fear. The expedition encountered the Second tribe, who controlled the Roanoke Islands. They established friendly relations with the natives on this first expedition. When the expedition returned to England in the autumn of 1584, they brought back 2 of the native peoples with them. The English described the region as a pleasant and bountiful land, saying it was like the Garden of Eden. Queen Elizabeth was quite impressed with the news of the results of Raleigh's expedition. She knighted Raleigh in 1585, and granted him the commission of Knight Lord and Governor of Virginia. Sir Walter Raleigh proceeded to seek investors to fund his new colony. In 1585, the Roanoke colony was started by its new governor, Ralph Lane. It was to be placed on Roanoke Island, using Raleigh's funding. Roanoke is located in what is now Dare County, North Carolina. But from the start, Lane's colony was troubled by a lack of supplies, and poor relations with the Native Americans. The settlers of the island were left waiting for a second ship that was supposed to bring those supplies. The ship was late in coming to the colony, and Lane abandoned the colony in 1586, returning to England with Sir Francis Drake. Following the failure of this first settlement, in 1587, a second expedition, led by John White, landed on Roanoke Island to set up a second settlement. White was to call the new city at the second Roanoke settlement, the city of Raleigh. A ship, piloted by Simon Fernandez, made a stop at the settlement in 1587, taking White with him back to England. They intended to return to the settlement by 1588, bringing more supplies. But they were delayed by the Anglo-Spanish War. The delay lasted a couple of years, and they could only finally return to the Roanoke settlement in 1590. Upon their return, they found the settlement fortified but abandoned. The cryptic word Croatoan was found carved into the wall of the settlement. They interpreted the meaning of this word, that the colonists must have relocated to the Croatoan island. But White was not able to head over to the island to check to see if the colonists were there, as rough seas and a lost anchor forced him to return to England. To this day, the fate of the approximately 120 settlers remains unknown. There are many different theories as to what ultimately happened to the lost colony of Roanoke, but no hard facts remain. In 1663, King Charles II of England granted a charter to start a new colony on the North American continent. His charter was what would establish the Carolina borders. He named the new colony Carolina in honor of his father Charles I. By 1665, a second charter was issued to attempt to resolve territorial questions. King Charles gave 8 Englishmen joint ownership of the land, as these 8 men were all loyal to the crown, or aided in Charles's restoration to the throne of England. This was after Oliver Cromwell, who had acquired power over the government, was put to death. Cromwell's death enabled Charles II to regain control of the British throne. In 1712, there were disputes over the governance of the Carolina colony. It was then that the colony split into 2, being now South Carolina and North Carolina. North Carolina would become a crown colony in 1729. Most of the English colonists arrived in North Carolina as indentured servants, hiring themselves as laborers for a fixed period to pay for their passage to the New World. In the early days of the colony, the line between indentured servants and African slaves was fluid. Some Africans were able to earn their freedom before slavery became a permanent status. Most of the free African American families in North Carolina, before the Revolutionary War, were descended from unions or marriages between free whites and enslaved or free African Americans. If a mother was free, then her children would be born free. But after the Revolutionary War, the state's legal delineations between who was free and who had slave status tightened. Conditions worsened for enslaved individuals. The need for cheap labor grew with the burgeoning economy, and the slave plantation systems grew along with it. This system supported the production of tobacco, cotton, and other textiles. In the early days of the North Carolina colony, pirates menaced the coastal settlements. One of the worst was the English pirate Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. In 1717, Teach captured the French slave ship known as the La Concorde and renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge. He equipped the ship with 40 guns and staffed her with a crew of over 300 men. From there he became a renowned pirate, taking his nickname of Blackbeard from his thick black beard and fearsome appearance. Blackbeard made his reputation through his daring acts on both land and sea, throughout the West Indies, and along the coastline of North America. In May 1718, Teach awarded himself the rank of Commodore, as he was at the height of his power. Later that month, his flotilla blockaded the ports of Charlestown in South Carolina. All vessels entering or leaving the port were stopped. He ransacked 9 vessels that stopped at the port. Then in June 1718, the Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground at Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, which is in present-day Carteret County. After the grounding, the crew of the Queen Anne's Revenge transferred her supplies to smaller ships. In November 1718, Blackbeard appealed to the governor of North Carolina for safe haven. The governor did grant both safe haven and a pardon to Blackbeard. But soon after, Blackbeard was killed in an ambush by troops coming from Virginia. In 1996, the remains of the Queen Anne's Revenge were located, and these remnants were added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. During the American Revolution, the English and Gaelic-speaking Highland Scots of North Carolina tended to remain loyal to the British Crown because of their long-standing business and personal connections to Great Britain. The lower-class English, Welsh, Scots-Irish, and German immigrants favored American independence. These immigrants had their first real dispute with the royal government when they fought virulently against high taxes. Public officials were overtaxing the immigrant farmers of North Carolina and subsequently skimming their own pockets with the extra funds those taxes brought. It got so bad for these farmers that they started to protest against the high taxation. The protests started out fairly civilly, but soon devolved into violence, culminating in the Hillsborough Riot of 1770. During the riot, the farmers attacked associates of Governor Tryon, burning their likeness in effigy and destroying property. The riot caused Governor Tryon to become more determined to stop the regulators from doing more harm and causing more chaos in the region. Governor Tryon passed the Johnston Riot Act, which gave him the authority to raise an army against the regulators. On the 16th of May 1771, Governor Tryon left his residence in New Bern with about 1,000 militia troops. He intended to finally address the regulator problem head-on. The regulators seemed prepared to go into battle against him, having 2,000 troops of their own. They hoped that their superior numbers would be enough to win the day. But these were farmers, bearing only the most minimal weapons, and were unprepared to match up against a militia with guns, cannons, and other weapons of war. Governor Tryon stationed his troops about a half-mile from where the regulators camped, near Alamass Creek. Governor Tryon sent an aide-de-camp to the head of the regulators to urge them to lay down their weapons and give up their fight, or face the consequences. The regulators refused to accept the governor's terms. Governor Tryon gave them one last opportunity to give up, telling them that they would indeed lose this battle as they were outgunned. The regulators considered this fact, and they tried to negotiate with Governor Tryon, stating that they would release 2 recently captured officers if Governor Tryon released 7 of their own men. Governor Tryon agreed to this but gave them only a half-hour to comply. When the half-hour came and went and the captured officers were not returned, Tryon ordered his troops to fire upon the regulators. The regulators used a new style of fighting, one that would be later used by the rebels, in their battles against the British troops during the Revolutionary War. This was a guerrilla fighting style, using the terrain as shields and cover for their weapons. But even with that kind of new fighting method, they did not stand a chance against the firepower of Governor Tryon's militia. The Battle of Alamass took only 2 hours in total to fight. Casualties were quite high on the regulators' side. After the battle, many of the regulators left North Carolina. Those who remained were forced to sign loyalty oaths to the Crown. It was said that the Battle of Alamass was the first battle, or the opening salvo of the American Revolution. Yet this small defeat did not change the radical nature of the area. British loyalists dubbed the Mecklenburg County area to be a hornet's nest of radicals. On the 12th of April 1776, North Carolina became the first to instruct its delegates to the Continental Congress to vote for independence. This was through the Halifax Resolves, which was passed by the North Carolina Provincial Congress. The date of this momentous event is memorialized on the North Carolina flag and state seal. Fierce guerrilla warfare erupted between bands of pro-independence and pro-British colonists, which was often just an excuse to settle private grudges and rivalries. North Carolina sent around 7,800 soldiers to fight in the Continental Army under General George Washington. A major American victory in the war took place at Kings Mountain, along the North and South Carolina border, on the 7th of October 1780. 1,000 American soldiers overwhelmed around 1,000 British troops, many of who were Carolinians loyal to the Crown. The road to Yorktown and America's final victorious battle of the Revolution went through North Carolina. On the 21st of November 1789, North Carolina became the 12th state to ratify the U.S. Constitution. After the American Revolution, Quakers and Mennonites worked to persuade slaveholders to free their slaves. Some of these slaveholders were indeed inspired to do so. This meant that the number of free people of color rose markedly in the first couple of decades after the Revolutionary War. Many of these freed people migrated to the western frontier, along with their European American neighbors. In the western frontier, the social systems were much looser. By 1810, nearly 3% of the free population of North Carolina numbered slightly more than 10,000. But in 1831, after Nat Turner's slave uprising, North Carolina, along with the other southern states, reduced the rights of free blacks. In 1835, the legislature withdrew their right to vote. In 1860, North Carolina was a slave state with 1/3 of the state's total population being enslaved African Americans. North Carolina did not vote to join the Confederacy until President Lincoln called on the state to invade its sister state, South Carolina. North Carolina was one of the last states to join the Confederacy. Around 125,000 troops from North Carolina served in the Confederate Army, and about 15,000 North Carolina troops served in the Union Army. This included those who left the state to join the Union Regiment. Following the end of the Civil War, North Carolina was put under the direct control of the U.S. military and was relieved of its constitutional government. The state went without representation within the United States Congress. They gained this representation back after ratifying the 13th Amendment. The first half of the 20th century was a bit rough for North Carolina. The state was affected by the Great Migration, where many African Americans left the state to go north for better opportunities. The state was also hard hit by the Great Depression, but the New Deal programs designed to boost cotton and tobacco production significantly helped the North Carolina farmers. After World War II, the state's economy grew rapidly. This was highlighted by the growth of cities like Charlotte, Raleigh, and Durham. The Research Triangle Park was established in 1959. It still serves as the largest research park in the United States. It is a major area that is used by universities for advanced scientific and technical research. North Carolina played a critical role in the civil rights movement that finally brought equality to African Americans. The Greensboro sit-ins were a series of nonviolent protests that took place from February to July 1960. They happened primarily in the Woolworth store in Greensboro. Though these weren't the first sit-ins of the civil rights movement, they were some of the most influential, and were very instrumental in bringing light to the movement. They served as a catalyst for other sit-ins throughout the South, where over 70,000 people participated. This did lead the Woolworth Company to remove its policy of racial segregation in the southern United States. The Greensboro Woolworth store is now the location of the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. Here are more fascinating facts and stories about North Carolina. In 1774, Penelope Barker, who lived in Edenton in Chowan County, North Carolina, was a loyal patriot of the American Revolution. She organized the Edenton Tea Party on the 25th of October 1774. Barker gathered 50 women together, and they signed a resolution supporting the boycott of British tea, agreeing only to drink tea made from mulberry leaves, lavender, and other local herbs. This protest was historically significant, as it was the first recorded women's political demonstration in America. North Carolina is the first state to have a successful flight of a mechanically propelled aircraft. This took place on the 17th of December, 1903, when Orville and Wilbur Wright took their plane, the Wright Flyer, to Kitty Hawk on the Outer Banks. They chose Kitty Hawk because of the frequent winds and soft sandy surfaces, which had been best when they conducted their glider experiments 3 years earlier. The Wright brothers knew the beaches of Kitty Hawk would be the best location for their first mechanically powered flight. Though the Wright brothers endured a few delays with their flight, due to breakdowns, they managed to make 3 flights that day. The first flight was 12 seconds long at 6.8 miles per hour. The next 2 flights covered approximately 175 and 200 feet, with each brother taking flight. 5 people witnessed the historic flights. If you visit the beach at Kitty Hawk, you can see a statue that shows the observers watching this historic Wright brothers flight. In 1893, in a drugstore in New Bern, North Carolina, Caleb Bradham invented what he called Brad's Drink, which was a flavored carbonated beverage. Bradham changed the name to Pepsi Cola in 1898, as he began advertising it as a way to relieve dyspepsia or indigestion. Cola was a reference to the cola flavor that was added as a flavoring to the soda. Though this was meant as a cure for indigestion, pepsin was never added as an ingredient in the drink. But the original recipe did include sugar and vanilla. His drink was so popular that by 1903, he moved the bottling of Pepsi Cola from his drugstore to a rented warehouse. In that year, Bradham sold almost 8,000 gallons of his syrup. The soda only grew from there, really gaining popularity during the Depression era. It is now one of the most popular soft drinks in the world. When English settlers came to North Carolina during the colony's earliest days of the 17th century, many were artisans and craftsmen. They settled in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, which they found to be a perfect location to practice their craft of making furniture. The Piedmont area was filled with an abundance of hardwood forests. Along the western region of the colony, towards the Blue Ridge Mountains, the trees of the forest included such malleable woods as pine, oak, chestnut, yellow poplar, and maple. All were the perfect materials for making the best furniture pieces. Some of these furniture craftsmen included men of the Moravian settlement of Salem, which is now Winston-Salem, and Quaker men who came from Randolph and Rowan counties. These highly skilled craftsmen based their furniture on patterns taken from the designs of high-end European cabinet makers. But they all added their own special local touch to the furniture they made. They built beds, desks, and chests of drawers, all items that would have been very difficult to transport to their area. The furniture they built was very solid, it was designed simply, and it was built to last a long time. In fact, many of the furniture they built a couple hundred years ago has lasted so well that they have become collector's items and museum pieces. However, the real rise of the North Carolina furniture industry started after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period. Business and community leaders of North Carolina knew they needed to shore up manufacturing in the state, as that was the future and a way to bring the state, which had been quite torn up after the war, back to the prosperity that it once enjoyed. They looked at utilizing the abundance of natural resources of the state, bringing in investors from the north. These investors invested in industries such as tobacco processing and textile plants. They also invested in logging the abundant wood that was found in the nearby heavy-growth forests. This wood would be used to make furniture. The North Carolina business and civic leaders also rebuilt the railroads. This made it easier to bring the natural resources that were harvested for various manufacturing industries to those manufacturing plants. Subsequently, the railroads then brought the finished products these manufacturing companies made to market. The area of High Point, which was named because it was the highest point on the North Carolina Railroad, was situated between Charlotte and Goldsboro, and included the cities of Thomasville, Lexington, Jamestown, Hickory, and Salem, and this was where North Carolina's first furniture factory was located. This was the White Furniture Company. The White Furniture Company was established in the 1880s. Up to this point, Southerners of the United States purchased their furniture mainly from northern furniture makers that were located in Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and throughout New England. Initially, the White Furniture Company did not compete with those northern furniture makers. They made furniture that was much simpler and more functional than their northern counterparts. It was also less expensive than their competition up north, so not necessarily, at first, were they considered by some Southerners to be up to par with their older, more established, furniture-making competitors. By the 1890s, North Carolina's furniture manufacturing began its first rapid growth. By the start of the 20th century, there were 44 furniture factories operating in the High Point region. This growth was spurred on, not only by the abundance of good materials, but also by the influx of low-wage employees. In the 1890s, North Carolina suffered an agricultural depression due to weak crop prices. Most of these farmers were tenant farmers and sharecroppers, and they did not own their land. A bad season or two was devastating, and many had no choice but to leave their farms and find work elsewhere. They went into the manufacturing sectors, with some working at the tobacco processing plants, while others went to the textile plants, which had the largest growth in manufacturing in North Carolina at that time, while others streamed to the plentiful jobs that were offered in the growing furniture industry. Though the jobs were low-paying, it was steady work, and these former farmers did not have to worry about providing for their families adequately from season to season as they would have with farming. The towns that housed these furniture manufacturers and their employees were similar to company towns, like the mining towns located throughout the Appalachians. These towns were run by industrialists and civic leaders, whose loyalty was to the manufacturers, not to the laborers. This made it very difficult for these low-paid laborers to unionize. While other industries in the state were able to make this transition, anyone working in the furniture manufacturing industry was seriously warned against doing so. If they did try to organize, they would be harassed, fired, or worse. When they were fired, they were immediately blacklisted and prevented from getting another job anywhere in the area. Often that meant that these men would have to uproot their families and look elsewhere for a job, sometimes leaving the state altogether. The Great Depression was a difficult time for the North Carolina furniture manufacturers. Many were unable to sustain their levels of growth due to the very poor economy, and many had to shut their doors for good. Those that remained were able to see another major growth, which started after World War II. With the end of the war, there came a boon in the U.S. housing market. GIs returned home, found good jobs, got married, had families, bought homes throughout the country, and needed to furnish those homes with many furniture items. The North Carolina furniture companies began to fill the needs of these servicemen and their families. There was also no competition from companies overseas, as just about everywhere else around the world, manufacturing struggled, while manufacturing boomed in the United States. This was when the North Carolina furniture manufacturers began growing exponentially. It was at a pace not seen thus far. Every furniture manufacturer in the state made money, whether they were big or small. Soon North Carolina became the top producer of both upholstered and wooden household furniture. Some of the famous furniture makers of the area included Broyhill, Thomasville, Henriton, and Drexel Heritage. By the 1980s, the High Point region of North Carolina was nicknamed the furniture capital of the world. At its peak, there were over 90,000 people employed in the North Carolina furniture manufacturing industry. The furniture industry started to change in the 1990s. And this was a very significant change. During this time, overseas competition began to flourish. These overseas competitors used lower quality materials and had cheaper prices. All of this enabled these overseas competitors to steal away business from the big North Carolina furniture manufacturers, thus slowing down profits, where they were not able to stay viable in the ever-changing market that leaned more on throwaway consumerism. Many of these once dominant North Carolina furniture manufacturers had little choice but to close down factories and lay off workers, scaling down their businesses in order to remain profitable. They eventually had to restructure the way they conducted business altogether. Some had to merge with other manufacturers just to stay in business. These furniture manufacturers then began implementing lean manufacturing methods that were meant to decrease production time and production costs. They did this by maximizing the use of scarce resources, minimizing waste, and increasing productivity. These new implementations have helped to maintain the furniture manufacturing industry that has remained in the High Point area of North Carolina. Though many of the factories have closed down and have gone away, those that remain are still considered some of the top furniture makers in the world. North Carolina still owns a significant and respected place in the furniture industry. Krispy Kreme Donuts was founded by Vernon Rudolph, who bought a yeast-raised donut recipe from a New Orleans chef. Rudolph rented a building in what is now historic Old Salem in Winston-Salem in 1937. He began selling his donuts to local grocery stores. But with steady growth, his business expanded to becoming one of the most popular donuts in the country to this day. The first miniature golf, or putt-putt course, opened in 1916 in Pinehurst, North Carolina. The course was part of the This'll Do miniature golf course. This new style of entertainment caught on quickly. Soon there were putt-putt courses all over the country. On the 7th of March 1914, George Herman Ruth, better known as Babe Ruth, hit his first professional home run in an exhibition game at the Cape Fear Fairgrounds in Fayetteville. He said of that first home run, "I got to some bigger places than Fayetteville after that, but darn few were as exciting." The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill owns the title of being the oldest public university in the United States. It holds this distinction as it was the first public university to hold classes and graduate students as a public institution. It was built in 1789 and opened its doors in 1795, graduating its first class in 1798. 3 presidents come from North Carolina. These include James Polk, Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Johnson. The nickname Tar Heel State came because workers in the North Carolina colony used to sell tar, pitch, and turpentine that extruded from the colony's longleaf pine trees. These materials were used to help build wooden ships. There is a legend that says that British soldiers were slowed down on their advance in the colony when they were stuck in the North Carolina tar during the height of the fighting of the American Revolution. In 1799, a 12-year-old boy by the name of Conrad Reed was playing in Meadow Creek near his family's farm in Cabarrus County, North Carolina. He spotted a gleaming gold nugget and took it home to show his father. Since gold really wasn't something that anyone in the community had seen before, and also because Conrad's family did not understand the value of the said nugget, they used it as a doorstop in the family's house for several years. Then in 1802, Conrad's father John Reed showed the rock to a jeweler friend, who recognized it as gold and offered to buy it. Reed was still not aware of the value of his item, so he sold it for $3.50, which equals $72 in today's money, but was approximately 1 week's pay for a farm laborer of that time. But soon after, Reed learned what the real value was of the gold that was on his land. John Reed entered into a partnership with 3 other men. They found another nugget in 1803 that weighed 28 pounds. News of their discovery spread quickly through regional newspapers. And landowners, who privately owned most of the land in the area, began searching for gold on their property. This began the first gold rush in the United States. By the 1820s, the gold deposits were mainly exhausted, and the mines that were used for gold were switched over and were used to look for quartz. Many members of the Cherokee Nation of North Carolina were forced to leave the state due to the Removal Act, which was put in place by President Andrew Jackson and the United States Congress on the 28th of May 1830. This forced the resettlement of Native Americans in the East, to land out west in the Oklahoma Territory. The Treaty of New Echota was signed in 1835, which resulted in the removal of the Cherokee of North Carolina. This removal was called the Trail of Tears. You can see this, and the rich history of the North Carolina Cherokee Nation at the Museum of the Cherokee Indians, in Cherokee, North Carolina. Here are even more interesting facts about the state of North Carolina. The Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, is a Chatauesque-style mansion that was built as a main residence for George Washington Vanderbilt and his family. It was built between 1889 and 1895, and is the largest private house in the United States. The Biltmore Estate covers approximately 8,000 acres, and is split in half by the French Broad River. It was designed by prominent New York architect, Richard Morris Hunt, who had previously built and designed various mansions and estates for other Vanderbilt family members. Vanderbilt also employed famous landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, to design the grounds of the estate. The Biltmore Estate is a popular tourist attraction, and remains one of the most prominent examples of Gilded Age mansions in the United States. The North Carolina Outer Banks are nicknamed the Graveyard of the Atlantic. It got this nickname due to its treacherous waters. It is where numerous shipwrecks happened, due to the coast's shifting sands and inlets. Along the Outer Banks, navigational challenges posed by the Diamond Shoals area off Cape Hatteras have caused the loss of thousands of ships, and an unknown number of human lives. It is said that more than 5,000 ships have sunk in these waters since record-keeping began in 1526. Speaking of Cape Hatteras, the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is the tallest lighthouse in the United States. It stands at 208 feet from the bottom of the foundation to the peak. The original lighthouse was commissioned by Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton on the 10th of July 1794. It was given the nickname Hamilton's Light. The Cape Hatteras Light marked very dangerous shoals that extend from the cape for a distance of 10 nautical miles. The original tower was built of dark sandstone and retained its natural color. A second light was constructed in 1868. The look changed to the more iconic look with the long black stripes. It is now the most recognizable lighthouse in the world. From the early 20th century, the surf around the lighthouse was steadily being attacked by erosion. They tried many things to counter this, but to no avail. Then in September 1999, the decision was made to relocate the lighthouse, moving it 1,500 feet from its original location. There was worry that the structure would not survive the move. The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse Station relocation project became the move of the millennium. They did such a magnificent job at moving the lighthouse that the general contractor, International Chimney, and expert house movers won the 40th Annual Outstanding Civil Engineering Achievement Award from the American Society of Civil Engineers in 1999. The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is one of the tallest masonry structures ever moved for relocation. When NASCAR committed to building a Hall of Fame for its sport, it chose the city of Charlotte as the location. Ground was broken on the Hall of Fame on the 26th of January 2007, and the Hall of Fame was officially opened on the 11th of May 2010. Charlotte was picked as the location because after it opened the Charlotte Motor Speedway in 1960, the Queen City became known as the stock car racing capital of the world. So the choice to place the NASCAR Hall of Fame here was really a no-brainer. The Fontana Dam at the Little Tennessee River, at 480 feet, is the tallest dam in the eastern United States and is the 20th in height among all U.S. dams. The dam is located in the Blue Ridge Mountains along the North Carolina-Tennessee border. The tallest mountain peak in the eastern United States is at Mount Mitchell State Park in the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. Mount Mitchell stands at an impressive 6,684 feet above sea level. You can still find wild horses along the Outer Banks. The wild Spanish Mustangs, which were likely left behind when the first Spanish expedition came to the area some 500 years earlier, still trot freely along the shoreline. People come to the Outer Banks hoping to get a glimpse of these magnificent creatures. The Reynolds Building in Winston-Salem, which was completed in 1929, was the prototype for the Empire State Building in New York City. Each year the Empire State Building sends a Father's Day card to the Reynolds Building, as a way to say thanks. Many famous people have come from North Carolina. Here are but a few of those famous people. Vince McMahon. Actor, Zach Galifianakis. Actress, Ava Gardner. Andy Griffith. Actor, Michael C. Hall. Comedian, Ken Young. Alicia Bridges. Director, Cecil B. DeMille. Jennifer E. Lee. Mike Evans. Comedian, Gallagher. Actress, Katherine Grayson. Pam Grier. Shirley Hemphill. Jackie Harry. Attorney, Star Jones. Sharon Lawrence. Julianne Moore. Frankie Muniz. Comedian, Amy Sedaris. David Sedaris. Jamie Press Lee. Comedian, Soupy Sales. J.B. Smooth. Skeet Ulrich. Reginald Vell Johnson. Ben Verin. Jill Wagner. Evan Rachel Wood. Bellamy Young. Sports announcer, Howard Cosell. Singer, Clay Aiken. Tori Amos. Fantasia Barrino. Nappy Brown. Shirley Caesar. George Clinton. John Coltrane. Luke Combs. Chris Daughtry. Fred Durst. Roberta Flack. Ben Folds. Don Gibson. Corday. Randy Jones. Ben E. King. Ronnie Millsap. Thelonious Monk. Kelly Pickler. Del Reeves. James Taylor. Randy Travis. Doc Watson. Walt Bellamy. Dwight Clark. Basketball player, Brad Doherty. Professional race car drivers, Dale Earnhardt Sr. and Jr. Coach, Joe Gibbs. Baseball player, Jim Catfish Hunter. Basketball player, Michael Jordan. Sonny Jorgensen. Meadowlark Lemon. Sugar Ray Leonard. Quick Draw Rick McGraw. Gaylord Perry. Professional driver, Lee Petty and Richard Petty. Author, Armistead Maupin. Author, William Sidney Porter, who is better known as O. Henry. Author, Tom Robbins. Author, Thomas Wolfe. Preacher, Ernest Angeli. Billy Graham. Franklin Graham. Richard Jordan, inventor of the Gatling gun. James Edgar Broyhill, founder of Broyhill Furniture. Herman Lay of Lay's Potato Chips. Newsman, David Brinkley. Politician, Elizabeth Dole. First Lady, Dolly Madison. And pioneer, Daniel Boone. Thanks again for watching this episode of What Makes the State of North Carolina So Special. If I missed anything, or if you want to share your own interesting facts about the state of North Carolina, please leave a comment below. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Also, look out for more videos like this one. We intend to highlight all 50 states and U.S. territories. So, stay tuned for more videos, and please share them with your family and friends. Thanks again, and see you soon.